Good morning, you guys. Welcome to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and we have been going through a variety of books, but today we are going through a variety of vintage magazines that I have for you guys, and I am excited to go through them with you, so let's just get right into it. The first one we have is one that we visited last time. There are some other articles in this one that we want to look at. This whole printing is about Princess Kate. I believe it was 5 years into their marriage and life together. And so that's what we're getting. So we get a deeper look at this Princess Catherine with 2 babies. Prince Louis wasn't known yet. Charlotte was the baby. So today we're going to look at a few articles. This one says back on the job, and I thought it would be an interesting one to start with because we are starting to see Princess Catherine get back on the job a little bit after fighting cancer this year. And so, like most of us know, I'm sure 2024 has been a year of unexpected things for the royal family. Both she and King Charles have been fighting cancer, but she is now being seen back in public from time to time. She's not back at her full job, but we are seeing her more. And so I just thought this would be fun. This was after a 4.5-month maternity leave. The princess filled her schedule with the work she loves and a few fun nights out. It was her first royal outing since Charlotte's birth, and Kate was facing a monsoon. High winds and driving rain had forced the cancellation of the July 26th America's Cup sailing races in Portsmouth, England, where she and Prince William hoped to watch Olympic gold medalist Sir Ben Ainslie compete. But a spot of horrid weather couldn't stop the intrepid princess. Before long, she had donned goggles to try a virtual reality sailing simulator, accepted wooden replicas of the Royal Navy's new aircraft carriers, and tried to cheer up a little girl who was in the middle of a meltdown. Mission accomplished. Professional princess. It's a job no one really expects to have when she's younger. At the University of St. Andrews, Kate studied art history. And her first job was an assistant accessories buyer for Jigsaw, a UK clothing chain. But Kate has taken her rarefied role, bringing charm, glamour, and unexpected relatability to her public engagements. So we get to see her here, walking along and viewing the crowds. And then they show her actually engaged in some of her goings on. So this one is listening to female inmates. She says, "I'm grateful to the women I met for sharing their difficult personal stories with me." After she made a secret visit to a women's prison near London, she talked about addiction and listened and accepted aprons made by them for her children. George is going to need him for his painting and coloring, she said. So this is her visit with the inmates, where she went in and spent time. I'm more interested in these right here. I don't know about you. I just don't know if I can get good lighting on those photos, but her actually visiting with the people. Now here we have her with President Xi of China, and then on the phone, getting busy, making deals at a London brokerage firm, where she helped raise $540 million for an array of causes. So this was a charity phone job. She's out with 007 star Daniel Craig. This was on the addiction courses. And then here she's meeting a Navy graduate. Within the duties she is asked to perform, Kate has found creative approaches. In February, she became a guest editor for a day at the Huffington Post UK to help raise awareness of children's mental health issues and, says a palace rep, the inspiring work being done by parents, teachers, researchers, and mental health professionals. And that's what we get for that article. So just a little look at her getting back to work after maternity leave. And then I just wanted to look at some of the fashion in this little printing. I actually have an entire book about the transformation and kind of maturing and process that Kate has gone through, or Princess Catherine has gone through, in her fashion. And it follows that step by step. And through that, they tell the story of then Duchess of Cambridge and now Princess of Wales, Catherine. But here is a look at the three before there was Meghan. Harry loved his new sister-in-law, Kate, is what he called her then. And then we have William and Kate together, really beautiful on the red carpet. And it shows some of the best looks from the last year. And of course, for her, that was post-baby. One of the things that a lot of women in the world have appreciated is the way that the British royal moms show that they don't look perfect after having a baby. She comes out and she still has a baby bump. I remember hearing one, I guess uninformed reporter ask, why does she still have a bump? Is something wrong? It's like, no, she had a baby a day and a half ago. She still is going to look about 6 months pregnant. It takes a while, buddy, to get back into shape. Here she is with a little pram and beautiful dresses. By the time she got to the christening, she was wearing this Alexander McQueen. That is quite a difference from that postpartum look we were talking about, where you still retain your belly. She got right back into shape, which is amazing. I never managed to. I don't know if you guys ever, went through that, but for the women among us, some of us did. And for me, breastfeeding always meant that I was going to be pudgy. And so I never was able to just drop the weight. In fact, many times I lost weight during a pregnancy and then would gain weight while breastfeeding. I don't know about you. All right, we have everything from casual to just day dresses. Nothing too chic here. This black one on the end looks a little more dressed up, but still more like day dresses for the then Duchess. Here, this includes a few evening looks. She looks really lovely in this last one. I like the colors there. Another round of fashion. One thing that I just noticed, one of these says, it says worn first in 2012, this form-fitting, blah, blah, blah. And then this one says she wore a favorite teal dress. One of the things that's been noted about Princess Catherine is that she does recycle her fashion. She doesn't just buy something, wear it once, and then discard it or give it to an assistant. She rewears her items. And then they kind of zero in on her haircut and say it's the mom cut, which is amazing because her hair, I'm sure, takes a lot more work than most moms have to devote to it. But she does do ponytails for sure and would pull up for various events. I mean, that's also useful in the wind, especially if you're going to be closely photographed, which she always is. Okay, there's that look at Kate. Now we're going to look at Jackie. This one is People magazine, and the date is October 12th, 1998. It says Jackie's Secret Romances. A surprising new book looks at the passionate relationships that helped a very public figure find private happiness. Journalist and author Edward Klein first met then Doubleday editor Jackie Kennedy Onassis in 1981 at a book party for one of his books. The next day, she sent Klein, then editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, a handwritten note on her personal blue stationery telling him she had stayed up all night reading his book and that if a movie were ever made, he should play the lead. How can any man resist something like that, says Klein, 61, who lives in Manhattan with his wife of 10 years, they note. After reading the note, the author asked Onassis to lunch, and a friendship, however guarded, was born. She kept her feelings to herself, even with friends, says Klein, who grew not only to know her, but also to write about her. He wrote an article for Variety Fair, and it was, she thought, an invasion of her privacy. It strained but did not end their friendship. After her death, he wrote in 1996, All Too Human, the love story of Jack and Jackie Kennedy. I actually have that one right there. It's the white one. And I'm thinking about reviewing that, like maybe next year. Not anytime super soon, but it's one that, especially now given this, that he knew her, but also that I've heard mentioned a lot in regard to understanding their relationship. So that one I think would be interesting. He says she could get down and dirty and gossip. She had a wicked sense of humor and liked to have fun, yet she was also able to be serious and knew literature and music. She was a rare human being. So, in the excerpt that follows, Klein details the life, the loves, and the losses that made Jackie so rare. We get a lot of photos in this, so I'll show them to you from time to time, but here is Jackie with, many people called Black Jack, her father. He was sort of like JFK. Of course, there she is sailing with JFK. In this one, it says with architect John Carl Warnecke to design the gravesite. Oh, that's sad. Oh my, it says later they became lovers, this architect and Jackie. Interesting. Well, she did with both of the men apparently, because we've learned about RFK and her relationship after Jack's death, haven't we? It says Jackie was never involved with Frank Sinatra. And here she is with Aristotle Onassis. And then finally, which I've never seen a picture of the two of them, Maurice Templesman. That's him. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to read a little bit about this. 2 months after JFK was assassinated in November 1963, Jackie moved into a Georgian townhouse in Washington, D.C.'s Georgetown. She was assigned 10 Secret Service agents, the first time the widow of a president had been given round-the-clock protection. Visitors such as Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara were stunned by the throngs who would gather outside her door. They would bring gifts. They would stand on boxes with binoculars trying to catch a glimpse. That's sad. I'm a freak now, she told McNamara as she escorted him into the living room. I'll always be a freak. I can't take it anymore. They're like locusts. They are everywhere. Women are always breaking through the police lines, trying to touch the children as they go in. Oof, that would be frustrating. I can't even change my clothes in private because they can now look into my bedroom window. I mean, surely you could get blackout curtains, right? But there would be that sense of, have I pulled it all the way? Am I sure that every bit of the window is completely covered? You know, am I at an angle, pulling off my shirt and changing into a sweater that they can see somehow? I mean, that would be a very discouraging lifestyle to constantly lead. Jackie had not counted on becoming a national institution as a result of her televised performance after Dallas. Her eyes were rimmed red. Her uncombed hair looked dry and brittle. McNamara felt pity for her. She had been elevated to the position of a mythical folk heroine, and yet she was a prisoner in her own home, thrown back on the company of the one man in Washington who did not seem to excite any prurient gossip, her Secret Service agent, Clint Hill. Tall, handsome, and as laconic as a movie cowboy, Hill had all the attributes of an American hero. One evening, about 2 months after the assassination, Jackie and Hill drove to the Embassy Row section of Washington. They slipped through the back entrance of the Fairfax Hotel, an unpretentious family-style establishment that housed such permanent tenants as the family of a future politician by the name of Al Gore. Jackie and Hill were greeted by Jack Scarla, the maitre d' of the hotel's famous Jockey Club restaurant, where she had dined not long before with actor Marlon Brando. Wild life. Jackie had telephoned Scarla in advance and asked him to reserve an area in the back room, which customers called Siberia. After they were seated, Jackie ordered a vodka martini. As the evening wore on, she drank 2 or 3 more. At one point during dinner, she got up from the table and staggered to the powder room. She didn't look any steadier when she got back. Then something really crazy happened, says a diner who was sitting with a friend in the Royale section and had a clear view of Jackie and Hill from the table. Jackie and Clint began engaging in what appeared to be a lot of heavy necking and petting. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. Maybe Jackie was just crying on Clint's shoulder. Maybe he was just comforting her. After a bit, they slumped down in their red leather banquette and disappeared from sight, the diner continued. Every once in a while, they would appear, then disappear again. This went on from 8:30 to 10:30. Jackie's hair was all messed up, and she looked like a mental wreck, but she didn't seem to care who saw her. Wow. It's interesting that her husband had been given a pass for all of his sexual philanderings, but that she, once he's dead, and once she's in grief, apparently has reached out for some connection with the one person she's allowed to be around, and it's reported on. That just feels a bit sad to me. I mean, she's a person of interest, so people are going to tell these stories, but it's still just, it makes me sad for her. In 1964, feeling closed in by the Capitol, Jackie moved to a 15-room apartment on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, where she tried to establish some semblance of a normal life for her and her children. Jackie enrolled Caroline at the Convent of the Sacred Heart School not far from her Fifth Avenue apartment. Shortly before Christmas vacation, Caroline turned up with a note for her biology teacher, Teresa Gorman, from Jackie, written on a piece of yellow-lined paper that had been torn from a notebook. It read, "Dear Mrs. Gorman, Caroline has my permission to bring home a mouse." Teresa phoned Jackie. "Are you sure you really want this mouse?" "Caroline's in love with the idea," Jackie said. "She absolutely insists." A few days later, Jackie, Caroline, Teresa, Bobby Kennedy, and 2 Secret Service agents all went shopping for a mouse cage at Bloomingdale's. Is that the sort of place where you found a mouse cage in those days? Bobby, who had just been elected senator in a landslide, moved down the crowded aisle with both arms extended, allowing people to shake his hands. It was utter pandemonium. "I don't mind for myself," Jackie told Teresa, "but I'm nerve-wracked about the children's safety. There are so many nutcases out there." Caroline chose a cage that looked like a Chinese lantern. Wow, so they did. Apparently it was a big deal back then, because there was choices even. "You'll need something like wood chippings and something for the mouse to nibble," Teresa said. "I'm beginning to think it would have been simpler to send the children away to camp for the holidays." A couple of days after the school closed for Christmas, the Mother Superior asked Teresa to call Jackie, and Jackie said, "You must come and take this mouse away. It's stinking up the apartment." "But won't Caroline be heartbroken?" She said. "Yes, she will," said Jackie, "but the mouse is killing my social life." So she apparently didn't know that they really do stink. I'm not a fan of even pet mice. To cope with the loss of the father, Jackie took Caroline and John Jr. to therapy. It shows a picture of them as young children. That's a better angle there. And then with John Jr. and with Caroline. Jackie did have a social life, more than anyone knew. Soon after Kennedy's death, she had called upon renowned architect John Carl Warnecke to design a gravesite just before the first anniversary of the assassination. And after they had worked together for months, Jackie approved Warnecke's design, and the two began a secret romance. I hadn't heard this. Shortly before Warnecke publicly announced approval of the design, he and Jackie got into her black Mercury convertible, put down the top, and headed for Cape Cod. The Secret Service followed at a discreet distance. It was a fine autumn day, and Jackie and Warnecke felt exhilarated as they sailed along with the wind in their hair. When they arrived at Jackie's house in Hyannisport, they found that Jackie's housekeeper had arranged for Caroline and John to spend the night at another house in the Kennedy compound. "We were all alone," Warnecke said. Okay, so he's the one who kissed and told. Jackie showed Warnecke her collection of landscape paintings by André Dunoyer de Sagonzac. I don't know how to speak French, y'all, so y'all can tell me, but I probably will butcher it even if I read it again. Warnecke admired the seascapes that she had done herself. They had dinner. Then Jack gave him a tour of the rooms upstairs. Warnecki's head almost hit the sharply slanted ceiling in Jackie's bedroom. Have y'all had homes like that? I know we had an older home once before, and then here in our house, it was built in 1900. So we have those slanted ceilings upstairs, and it does take some getting used to of where you can walk without leaning. He stood with Jackie for a few moments at the window, looking out at the waters of Nantucket Sound. Then wordlessly, he led her over to the bed that she had once shared with Jack Kennedy, and they began to make love. This feels so tawdry that he would tell these things. After a year of pent-up feelings, said Warnecki, it was like an explosion. I remember saying to myself, what am I doing here? What's happening? A lot's been written about Jackie being cold, he went on. Well, that's interesting because, yeah, it had. That maybe that's why Jack had to fool around, is because she was just not responsive. He says that image is all wrong. There was nothing inhibited or cold about her. All those aspects that made Jackie so delightful were all, her sense of fun and joy were also a part of her lovemaking. Gross. Okay, this is really not fun to read, y'all. I understand that people are going to share the facts, and I think that's different than sharing some of these like super intimate personal moments that are meant only for two people to share. I think this is really trashy. He told her after that he loved her. Unknown to all but a few close family friends, the romance continued for almost 2 years, but it was not meant to be. Also courted by multimillionaire Greek shipping tycoon Aristotle Onassis, Jackie opted for the life of luxury and isolation from the public eye that he offered, which kind of, but he would publicly humiliate her too. He would send journalists out to take photos of her when she was sunbathing. It says that after marrying, that their family spent a lot of time on Scorpios. Well, here's Jackie and Ari, and then Jackie and John down in a speedboat owned by Onassis. She's got her hair tied back there. Okay, well, I'm going to skip ahead through the Ari years to the one that I've not read that much about. After Ari's death, following protracted legal wranglings between his daughter Christina and his widow Jackie, she ultimately inherited $25.5 million. She returned to Manhattan and there sought out an old friend, diamond broker Maurice Templesman, for financial advice, and in time, more. Jackie and Templesman struck many people as an unlikely pair. She was a living legend, athletic, outdoorsy, fun-loving, a Roman Catholic who had been reared in aristocratic settings. He was an obscure diamond merchant, overweight, physically unfit, intellectual, a Jew who had grown up in modest circumstances. Her friends found it hard to grasp how someone from Jackie's class could embrace someone that was a Jewish refugee from Hitler's Europe as her significant other. They found it even harder to imagine that she slept with him. My gut tells me they were not intimate, said one of her close friends. What these friends failed to appreciate, however, was that in many ways Jackie had risen above her narrow-minded class. What was more, she'd always been attracted to men like Templesman, paternal figures who fulfilled her emotional needs. After she was widowed for the second time, Jackie grew aware of her tendency to abdicate power over her life to men. This discovery that all her adult life she had been a willing pawn in the hands of men came as a humiliating shock to her. She was almost 50, an age at which most women want to direct their own lives, and she wondered if it was not too late for that. It was not. Templesman, who moved in with Jackie in 1982, boy, that would have been really a scandal, I think, made her a very rich woman, worth close to $200 million by 1989. Ironically, she was now finding her greatest happiness in everyday pleasures, family, friends, and her work as an editor at Doubleday. It talks about her work on Doubleday. It says she did her homework, that she did not bring decor except for photos of the children to her office. It says she was not being Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She was being an editor at Doubleday. She changed a great deal over the years, said Loring. In the beginning, she still seemed very haunted by things. She still seemed to be pursued by her own demons, but all that changed as the years went on, and one can suspect that that had a lot to do with Maurice Templesman. And finally, having a very satisfying and good relationship with someone who was very strong and a very brilliant and quiet and charming and companionable person to be with. That undoubtedly was a tremendous influence on bringing her back to the happy person again. I also think she was delighted with her children, that as they grew up, she was beginning to be so proud of them and so happy with them. And then it talks about her death from cancer. It says that one evening before her death, she sat with a friend named Nancy Tuckerman. A roaring blaze was going in the fireplace when Nancy entered the library. Jackie was sitting before the fire, an astrakhan over her lap. On the table beside her were bunches of letters that Jackie had received over the years from famous people. Jackie unbound the letters and read some of them to Nancy. Then, when she was finished, she tied them together again with the ribbon and tossed them into the crackling fire. Wow. We're told a little bit about her death, but I just wanted to share this photo with you. This is 1 month before her death with Maurice Templesman. Now, as we've talked about, Maurice was married. I think he was married at that time. I feel like that would have been really humiliating for his wife. I don't know. I know they had some sort of modern sensibility about it, I suppose, but for him to move in with her and then be taking public photos with her just seems beyond what a wife should have to endure. All right, the 1920s. We're going to look at this book. It's The Decades of the 20th Century by Life magazine. We are at the 1920s. So here we go. It says radical ideas challenged the nation. Many, like the teaching of evolution, were knocked down, but the wildest notion of all, that the country's female half might have a say in its political future, actually caught on. So did bobbed hair and short skirts. So here, of course, we have the members of the National Women's Party celebrating their new voting rights in 1920. That's what that is. The suffragettes. This, it says, the lone eagle soars, the bambino scores. So America's rooted wildly for Charles Lindbergh as he took off from New York, flying into a sodden dawn. Even the 40,000 raucous boxing fans who crowded into Yankee Stadium for a prize fight were moved to stand still and hushed while a prayer was said for the 25-year-old aviator. On May 21st, 1927, some 33 hours after he began the first solo transatlantic flight, Lucky Lindy landed at Paris's Le Bourget airfield. Despite his nickname, the slender and handsome Lindbergh actually placed his faith in a meticulous preparation. The Spirit of St. Louis packed 451 gallons of gasoline, but only 5 sandwiches. If I get to Paris, I won't need any more. And if I don't get to Paris, I won't need any more either, he said. His heroics won him a $25,000 prize and the adulation of the world. Huge, homely, and cheerily profane, George Herman Babe Ruth was as profligate as the aviator was austere. The slugger hit 60 home runs that year, pushing the Yankees to their 4th World Series title in 7 years. America's heroes didn't have to be perfect, just larger than life. So it says Lindbergh was 170 pounds. The Babe was 220. Right there it shows him weighing in. That's an interesting contrast. How are you going to keep them down on the farm? Americans who came of age during World War I were a disillusioned lot, so alienated from their parents' Victorian values that Gertrude Stein called them a lost generation. But an influential part of that generation found themselves in Paris in the 1920s. The mass migration of artists, writers, and wannabes owed much to a disdain for prohibition and provincialism, and perhaps more to the lure of cheap steamship fares and a terrific exchange rate. The scum of Greenwich Village, New York, has been skimmed off and deposited in large ladles full on the French capital, wrote Ernest Hemingway. Yet Hemingway himself was among the voluntary exiles, along with a passel of other luminaries in the making. Writer F. Scott Fitzgerald, poet E. E. Cummings, photographer Man Ray, sculptor Alexander Calder. Calder is the one who, if you walk into the National Museum of Art in the modern side, up over your head, there's a huge kind of primary colored mobile from Alexander Calder. But yeah, beautiful thoughts. And things were being distanced from the old ideas of beauty, and they were all a part of that. Of course, they mingled with a crowd of European geniuses, including James Joyce, Pablo Picasso, Joan Miro, and Marc Chagall. So here in this, we have Hemingway, including a variety of, well-to-do people there. And then this says, Josephine Baker, a St. Louis-bred singer and dancer, came to Paris with a musical review and stayed. That some African Americans had traveled to Europe and found it a respite from the travails of segregation. That's a beautiful photo. It says here, Legs Diamond with brother Ed, mob bodyguard Fatty Walsh, and Lucky Luciano survived 3 shootings. Wow. The 4th did him in. Gangbuster J. Edgar Hoover. Oh my word, we get a very young look at J. Edgar Hoover. I've only ever seen the fat older man. Wicked man, as far as I know. It says he transformed the corrupt Bureau of Investigation into the untouchable FBI. It says before 1920, urban gangs were plenty nasty, but their ambitions were relatively modest. Prostitution, gambling, providing hired goons for political machines. Then came Prohibition. Suddenly, millions of Americans were thirsty for an illegal substance, and organized crime became big business. Gangsters brought out breweries and hired legions of alky cookers and rum runners. They shipped the hooch in armored trucks and hijacked those of other dealers. With Tommy guns blazing, they battled for control of local markets. Instead of working for politicians, they bought them wholesale. Bred in city slums, these poor boys became spectacularly good by doing bad. Many became national celebrities. Wow. Oh my. A Southern organization, when it was crushed by federal officials in the 1870s, the Ku Klux Klan came back nationwide 5 decades later. In 1925, Klan membership across the U.S. exceeded the population of Indiana, which was a center of KKK activity. Oof. Hatred with a hooded face. After decades of dormancy, the Ku Klux Klan returned to stalk the land in 1920s. The racist organization had been revived in 1915 by a Georgia preacher named William Joseph Simmons. How wicked. But it only attracted a few hundred followers until 1920, when Simmons hired public relations consultant Edward Clark to market the invisible empire. Clark set up a system in which local recruiters, who were known as Kleagles, sold membership, literature, and regalia for a portion of the take. By 1925, they had signed up more than 4 million dues-paying members nationwide. My goodness, the old Klan had fed on hostility of Southern whites towards Southern blacks. Now there were other hatreds to exploit. There were fresh anxieties. African Americans were heading north, alarming paler folk along the way. Many small-town whites felt threatened by European immigrants, by supporters of the Russian Revolution, by the freewheeling spirit of the Jazz Age. So the new Klan added Jews, Catholics, leftists, and the sexually impure to its enemies list. At its peak, it controlled state houses from California to Ohio. Masked Klansmen spread terror with arson, beatings, and lynchings, but murder was too much for most Klan members, as were a spate of scandals and factional feuds. By 1930, membership had shrunk to 100,000, mostly in the South. Wow, 4 million. Okay, to go from 1920, almost none in Georgia, to 1925, 4 million. but then by 1930 down to 100,000. Perhaps that shows that they understood the excesses that they had taken part in, at least the ones who bailed. And in 1944, the Klan went back into hibernation, where it remained until the civil rights movement of the 60s promised fresh blood. We get prohibition going down the drain, so they're pouring out barrels of alcohol here. The century's third decade began not with a bang, but with one last lingering gulp. In January 1920, the 18th Amendment became law, banning the sale of beer, wine, and liquor. Hailed as a noble experiment, prohibition proved just the opposite. Procuring illegal refreshment became a national obsession. Bootlegging became a growing industry, sparking vicious turf wars among avaricious mobsters. The speakeasy emerged as a neighborhood institution. In New York City, it was estimated that there were more than 30,000 by decade's end. At least one Virginia still owner was always glad to see law officers who were among her best customers. Wow. It says federal agents pour barrels of illegal booze into a LA gutter in 1920. Then we have John Scopes, who stirred up a different sort of legal storm when he defied Tennessee law by teaching the theory of evolution. His 1925 trial pitted proponents of evolution against fundamentalist Christians. Two eminent lawyers, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, squared off in a Dayton, Tennessee courtroom. He was found guilty and fined $100. So there's Scopes. The country swings to the sound of New Orleans. So we have a flapper here dancing, doing her little Charleston moves. And it says, after the horrors of the Great War, Americans were done with marching and ready for a new beat. They found it in the bobbing rhythms of groups such as King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. From the sporting houses of New Orleans, jazz had wafted northward. By 1922, the year young Louis Armstrong joined Oliver's ensemble. Oh, I didn't realize. There he is. There he is. By the time he had joined, jazz was drawing mixed-race crowds to clubs in Harlem and Chicago's South Side. Many white musicians responded as if they had never heard music before. Why isn't everybody in the world here to hear this? They would ask. Bobbed hair, bound breast, and open interest in sex scandalized polite society when the flappers came into view. One New York preacher blamed the raw new music for promoting nervousness, lawlessness, and primitive, savage animalism. Okay, that's what we get about the 1920s, y'all. That was enjoyable, insightful. It's interesting, I had never heard about the rise and then fall of the KKK like that. We're going to look back at this same magazine that we did to look at John Lennon, and I thought it would be fun actually to read about the movie Misery. Kathy Bates has a gift for playing cheerily hostile, paranoid misfits. Her personality is like a series of small shocks. She can slip from politeness to rage in a millisecond, and when she does, you realize that the two states are virtually identical, that she's simply gone from a control freak who has gone from controlling herself to controlling you. Bates brought her snappish, no-nonsense anger to a different movie, and her performance is this comic spark that drives Misery. Interestingly, Misery was directed by Rob Reiner. I had forgotten that. He's the one who directed Princess Bride. He directed Spinal Tap and Misery. What an odd group of movies. He also actually has done a podcast that I am putting together a review of, where he went into, he's a JFK assassination buff, and so he did his own personal investigation and shared about it in a series of, I think, 10 or 20 podcast episodes. So I'm working through those to share with you all. Set in the snowy mountains of Colorado, this cabin fever horror comedy is about a famous romance novelist, Paul Sheldon, who drives off the edge of a road during a blizzard, suffers 2 broken legs, and is rescued by his #1 fan, Annie Wilkes, a prim, fat, gruesomely repressed psychopathic nerd who straps Paul into bed and makes him her patient and her prisoner. Annie, a professional nurse, lives by herself in a cozy Victorian house tucked away in the Colorado wilderness. Her whole life is a series of depressive diversions. She loves to sit in bed scarfing Cheetos and watching Love Connection, and she's devoured all of Paul's misery novels, a series of trashy bestsellers featuring the beloved romantic heroine Misery Chastain. As it happens, Paul is sick of writing about misery. That's how the movie begins, actually. And his latest misery installment finally kills the character off, and it's about to be published. He knows that. She does not know that. That's how we meet him before his accident, is he's about to write the book that's going to kill off his famous character. When Annie learns that Paul has written her favorite heroine out of existence, she feels personally betrayed. It's as though he had murdered her fantasy life. Even before she makes this grisly discovery, her idolization of Paul is so extreme, so tangled up with her inability to live in the real world, that she's obviously off her rocker. Misery is a series of escalating sick gags in which Annie, wielding her devotion like an axe, threatens and cajoles Paul into writing yet another misery novel and bringing the character back to life. Oh, that's probably enough for that. Y'all may not be as big of fans as I am, but this is a great movie. If you haven't seen Misery for some reason, it is fascinating. It says it's horror, but I will say it's not a gruesome horror movie. There are some gruesome parts, but it is way more of a thriller type horror movie. This is a book that I actually might like to go through with you guys in total, but I thought we would just take a peek at it today. It's In Person, The Prince and Princess of Wales. This was like $1.50 at a thrift store last week, and I saw it and I just thought it's like a time capsule. This was actually, it says, produced with the cooperation of their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales. And, you know, when this was published, people had such high hopes for them. There they are. They look happy and in love. They put on a good show of it. Oh, I actually got it for $1 because there's the little price tag, but I just noticed this lovely photo on the back, which has, let me get that price tag off, Princess Diana with William and Harry. Up on the piano is the Queen Mother, and I suppose that's Diana's family, although I don't know for sure. Do you guys know? Well, it says profits from the sale of this book are being donated to the Prince of Wales Charities Trust, which I understand he does a lot of really good work with that trust. It says, since their fairy tale wedding in 1981, the Prince and Princess of Wales have been the most talked about and the most written about couple in the world. Each day, the popular press has some new story on their marriage, their likes and dislikes, their children, and their relationships with other members of the royal family. This book at last puts the record straight. How do they view their role in today's world? Are they able to live a normal family life? What of their two sons? How will they be educated? Etc. This was published in 1985. So similar, actually, to the Princess Kate book or magazine book that we've been looking at. Here is William and Harry. He's in corduroy blue overalls, and then William, it looks like, is in a similar blue shorts so that they can match. And we'll just look at this first part, the partners. Oh, so it shows such a lovely young Diana and Charles. My goodness, it's no wonder why people were captivated by her. She really is beautiful. Theirs is a partnership, and it works. They are busy, very much in love, and trying to do their job, pleasing people, working for people day by day. But they are still working out day by day just what their job is and just what people expect it to be. The Prince of Wales, with 37 years' experience, is cautious about it all. It is more than anything else a way of life. It's more than just a job. It's a complete 24-hour-a-day business, really. The princess, just 4 years into the mission, is modest. I feel my role is supporting my husband wherever I can and always being behind him, encouraging him. And also, most important, being a mother and a wife. That's what I try to achieve. Whether I do is another thing, but I do try. It's never been an easy job. The Black Prince managed it in the 14th century by helping to thrash the French at Crécy and, actually, capturing the French king at Poitiers. But since him, there have not been all that many successes as Prince of Wales. Indeed, apart from the Princess Alexandra a century ago, there have not been many popular princesses of Wales. Well, that's definitely changed. In fact, there was controversy about whether or not Catherine would become Princess of Wales, but of course she did, because what else would she be? She's married to the Prince of Wales, so she's the Princess of Wales. But there was even that controversy even a number of years ago, like would they actually take the beloved Princess of Wales title that Diana had held and give it over to Catherine, but they did. Prince Charles spells it out. The sovereign obviously has a set role to perform within the Constitution, but the heir to the throne doesn't. And you could easily sit around and do nothing, he says. That is, of course, precisely what his great uncle, who ended up Duke of Windsor, thought, and often did. And that would be Edward, the abdicator. Here we have Charles and Diana with the Pope, Prime Minister and his wife in Australia, and actually the Prince of Wales, then, now King Charles, just got back from a tour to Australia. It says they are, in their own minds, internal ambassadors in a real sense, as well as being regular ambassadors abroad in the United States, Australia, Canada, and Italy. He has a list of good causes to support that far outnumber the regiments whose uniform he wears. Collectors of city directorships have simple, undemanding lives compared with his. So far, the princess has one regiment, the Royal Hampshires, one RAF station, Wittering, and County Cricket 11, Gloucester. But she's been selective. I don't want to dive into something without being able to follow it up. Nothing would upset me more than just being a name on top of a piece of paper and not showing any interest at all. I did have a question for you guys. If you are Brits or if you know a lot about the royal family, I notice it says that they are regular ambassadors in the United States, which makes sense that they would be an ambassador of goodwill for the people of Britain. But then it lists Australia and Canada, which I thought were Commonwealth countries and therefore would be at least affiliated, right? It's not like he would have been over them, but he wouldn't have been seen as an ambassador in the same way as he is to United States and Italy, which are both in this list. So would you, in the comments, just explain how they're using this word? Because this surprises me. Well, let me know if you're interested. I could do a whole deep dive on this book. We could read through and see the entire book. But it's definitely a time capsule glimpse at the Prince and Princess of Wales in 1985. This newspaper, I have a stack that I've told you guys about over here of old newspapers that I got just from a bin. I mean, this one you can see is ripped from 1963. So this one is Monday, November 25th, 1963, which is 3 days after Kennedy was assassinated here in Dallas. And it's sections from the Dallas Morning News. The thing that I wanted to share with you guys in this, I actually just barely opened it because this newspaper is so brittle. I didn't want to rip anything, but if this is the food section. So there's nothing about the president that I can tell in here. But I did just want to show you guys because I don't think about it being Thanksgiving right after JFK's assassination, but of course it was. And so it talks about the saving of money, but nothing on this page was reworked after the assassination, which is a little bit crazy. I feel like they would have at least, nowadays you would just quickly edit, but maybe this printing had already been set and prepared and they didn't want to fiddle with it. But I just can see saying, and this year in particular will be a difficult year or something, but it gives no nod at all. But I did just think it was interesting. It says Penny Watcher menus. Here is a suggested dinner menu for Thanksgiving week featuring the traditional turkey and trimmings. By choosing less expensive cuts of meat and watching for good buys in fresh fruits and vegetables, you can save money on your grocery bills and therefore afford to splurge a little on your holiday meals. It actually has a whole week's menu here of different things you can serve earlier in the week so that then you can go bonkers on Thursday for your Thanksgiving menu. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. Very interesting. And there's little, like a lemon meringue puff tart recipe. I wonder if recipes like that are still salvaged. I know there's food bloggers who bring back old recipes or create them recreate them. Okay, the last thing that we are going to close up with is another reading from Forgive My Grief by Penn Jones Jr. This book was a critical review of the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We have George Senator. It says, even in the face of public acceptance of the Warren Commission report, this newspaper continues to call for a reopening of the Warren Commission. Continued killings of those who seem to have accidentally learned too much of what went on in Dallas are cause for alarm. I want to note that the Warren report was published on September 24th, 1964. So it took 10 months to investigate and come up with an answer that they published to the American people just 10 months later, which seems very fast to me. The real bloodbath will come when the successful assassins become unhappy with their present position, or, as it seems unlikely, have a conscience which demands their confession. On June 3rd, 1965, we told in an exclusive story of the murders of Bill Hunter and Jim Koth and how they were related to a significant visit to the Ruby apartment on the Sunday that Ruby killed Oswald, November 24th, 1963. In this installment, we tell of the strange behavior of federal agents to an unimportant person associated in a distant way to Ruby, and of that person's strange death far away from Dallas. We're going to read a little bit about this untimely death, and then we're going to skip ahead to a different untimely death that I noticed was right in here, number 3. On page 363 of the Commission report, we find these words: one conceivable association between Ruby and Oswald was through John Carter, a boarder at 1026 North Beckley Avenue while Oswald lived there. So they're going to tell us about this man, John Carter, who was a boarder at the place where Oswald also lived, at the boarding house. Carter was friendly with Wanda Joyce Killam, who had known Jack Ruby since shortly after he moved to Dallas in 1947 and worked for him from July 1963 to early November 1963. Actually, she told me she had worked in Ruby's club for 2 years. Mrs. Killam, who volunteered the information about Carter's residence during an interview with an agent of the FBI, has stated that she did not think Carter knew Ruby. Carter, who gave a deposition only, stated that he had not heard of Ruby until Oswald was shot, and had talked briefly with Oswald only once or twice, and had never heard Oswald mention Ruby or the Carousel Club. The Commission has no reason to disbelieve either Mrs. Killam or Mr. Carter. To this writer, it seems more than passing strange that so little information is given on Carter by the FBI or the Commission. Carter was a house painter, as was Henry Thomas Hank Killam, Wanda Joyce's husband. Hank and John Carter worked together on several painting jobs. Carter visited in the Killam home. How is it possible that he was such good friends with the Killams, whose wife worked for Ruby, and yet Carter never heard of Ruby? So he was a neighbor of Oswald and a friend of these Killams. According to Wanda Joyce Killam, her husband was constantly hounded by federal agents after the assassination. Killam lost jobs repeatedly in Dallas when agents would call on the job and cause Killam to lose time from his work for more questioning, she told this writer. If Killam was such an interesting person to the federal authorities with regard to the assassination, the public should have been told so by the Commission. In desperation, Killam left Dallas in search of peace and for a chance to hold a job and make a living for his wife. Killam drifted from place to place but found what he thought was respite in Pensacola, Florida. He got a job and telephoned his wife to come to him in Pensacola. On the morning of March 17, 1964, Hank Killam was found dead on the streets of Pensacola with his throat cut. The newspapers there conjectured that Killam had either fallen or jumped through a plate glass window and cut his throat. The papers did not include the possibility that he might have been pushed through the plate glass. This writer has been unsuccessful in efforts to contact John Carter. So Carter was a person that was interviewed by the Warren Commission. Says he didn't ever talk about Jack Ruby with Lee Harvey Oswald, and yet he knew the Killams. And then shortly after the Killams are being hounded by the federal agents, Killam is put to death in Pensacola. That is interesting. Then we have number 3 in this book, which I did not know. I showed you guys the table of contents that first day, but it's basically their look into the odd people or situations having to do with the Kennedy assassination. This one is Kilgallen. It actually includes another name that I know as well, which is Kantor. I have a book by Seth Kantor. This editor has not finished reading the more than 15,000 pages of the Warren Commission report, testimony and exhibits. Now he did, because I've listened to an interview with him for a radio program, and he specifically said that he had read it, but he thought he was one of less than 1,500 people in the entire United States that would have sat down to do so because of how thick it was. It says there are so many distortions, variations, and failures, however, that it seems imperative to bring some of these matters before the public as soon as possible. Other writers are doing this quite well. I join them from near the scene to contribute as much as possible. Members of the Warren Commission were so busy with their careers they were unable to attend enough of the sessions to get a continuity of events. So that's interesting. I have wondered if the men on the commission were set aside for that entire year, and he is saying they did not. That many of them would be doing the things in their field and then showing up to occasional meetings. These men are all great in their fields, but they wandered in and out of the hearings like it was a cattle auction. Real work of the commission was left to the practically anonymous assistants. Wow, that's interesting. So that definitely makes the case that material could have been kind of hustled off to the side, and you could still say, well, it was heard, it was documented. You can see that if you go back and read on page such and such, you can read her whole testimony, and yet they weren't necessarily there to deal with the actual questioning and the investigation. Interesting. This inattention may be the cause for some of the shortcomings, but many of us feel that a reading of the testimony will show that the commission fled from any indication of conspiracy. Some witnesses were not called when conspiracy was indicated. Some witnesses were made out to be liars by other witnesses when conspiracy became an issue. In several instances, the commission simply failed to ask the next most obvious question when conspiracy was about to appear. As soon as the computers have solved the power failure in the Northeast, this writer would like to see a computer figure the odds on such an incident as the assassination taking place with so many strange and fearful coincidences happening before and continuing after the assassination with no conspiracy on the part of anyone. Now we can add to that list the strange deaths, that of Miss Dorothy Kilgallen. Miss Kilgallen joins Bill Hunter, Jim Cody, Tom Howard, and others. Miss Kilgallen is the only journalist who was granted a private interview with the Jack Ruby since he killed Lee Oswald. Judge Joe B. Brown granted the interview during the course of the Ruby trial in Dallas to the intense anger of the hundreds of other news people present. Now, this talk that she had with Jack Ruby is the only known conversation with Jack Ruby in a non-bugged room after he killed Lee Oswald. And she had it, and shortly thereafter, she was murdered. Questioning in Dallas becomes increasingly difficult. Witnesses cannot be located, and when located, they are understandably reticent. It is important, however, to point out that pertinent questions were omitted by leading lawyers in our land. We will ask the questions in print during the coming weeks. Maybe someone will have some of the answers which history deserves. We will comment this week on one of the 6 witnesses found by us so far, which the commission claimed were either confused or lying when his testimony might indicate conspiracy. Seth Kantor. I have a book by Seth Kantor that's actually called, what's it called? Just Jack Ruby, I think. It's all about Jack. Seth Kantor, reporter in the presidential parade press bus, was covering the story for the Scripps Howard chain of newspapers. He had worked in Dallas for 2 years for the Times-Herald. Kantor testified that he had met Ruby in Parkland Hospital before the president had been pronounced dead. Yes, I forgot that. His testimony is the one that said that Jack Ruby was there. And interestingly enough, this man, Penn Jones, was also, he had been waiting for the president at the market hall where JFK was going to just hop on the highway, go up to the Dallas Market Hall and give a speech. But instead, of course, he went to the hospital. And those reporters who were at the Market Hall, many of them went straight to Parkland. And so they were there together. Penn Jones took a photo that he said he believed it showed the back of Jack Ruby, but it's not conclusive. It shows him walking away at Parkland Hospital. Seth Kantor places Jack Ruby there at the hospital before the president had been pronounced dead. The commission makes it appear that Kantor hardly knew Ruby. Seth Kantor, a newspaperman who had previously met Ruby in Dallas, reported and later testified that Jack Ruby stopped him momentarily inside the main entrance to Parkland Hospital sometime between 1:30 and 2 p.m. on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. Ruby stayed in business in Dallas by licking the boots of the police and playing it cozy with newsmen. He was in the Dallas News Building at the time that President Kennedy was shot. He was in the Herald Building late that same night. Other witnesses have testified that he served free drinks to the police whenever they wanted drinks. Kantor says he printed at least 6 feature stories furnished to him by Jack Ruby. So this was someone he knew quite well. So the commission tried to act like, oh, he kind of knew him. But this is saying, no, he knew him very well. They had worked together on 6 different articles, and they talked in Parkland Hospital. Ruby's remarks to Kantor were in harmony with Ruby's statements to other people. Kantor says Ruby asked, "Should I close my places for the next 3 nights, do you think?" Ruby was concerned about that. He wanted to show honor. The commission concluded that Kantor was mistaken because of the short time element. They said Kantor probably did not see Ruby at Parkland Hospital in the few minutes before or after 1:30, the only time it would have been possible for Kantor to have done so. If Ruby immediately returned to the Carousel Club after Kantor saw him, it would have been necessary for him to have covered the distance from Parkland in approximately 10 or 15 minutes in order to have arrived at the club before 1:45, when a telephone call was placed at Ruby's request to his entertainer, Karen Bennett Carlin. At a normal driving speed under normal conditions, the trip can be made in 9 or 10 minutes. However, it's likely that congested traffic conditions on November 22nd would have extended the driving time. A partial reading of the testimonies of dozens of witnesses would convince most people that Jack Ruby was the one man in Dallas who could ride in a police car anytime he wanted to do so. With sirens blowing, a police car could have covered the distance in question in the 9 or 10 minutes claimed by the commission. But Ruby's presence at Parkland could have dark connotations, so the commission said Seth Kantor was confused. The commission used the records of a payphone in Ruby's club with no assurance of who made the call, and the time estimates given by Ruby employees and ex-convict Andrew Armstrong as being more reliable than newspaperman Seth Kantor. In this way, they again avoided the question of conspiracy between Ruby and others, particularly some employees or officers of the Dallas Police Department. Well, that is fascinating. Interesting stuff. Okay, so that's Forgive My Grief, Volume 1. Like I said, I do have Volume 2. Okay, you guys let me know if you're interested in the Charles and Diana book. You guys have a great day. I love these Vintage Variety Hours, and I hope you do too. Hope you have a lovely day. Bye.